Hey gang, so time to address this rear jacking point. I've been slack, keep getting distracted by a bloody 7 Series. Anyway, this video is going to be a start to finish how to do the rear jacking point. I figured this is going to be useful to a lot of you, so yeah, let's get into it. First things first, most of you are going to have this bottom piece rusty because these inserts here where it goes up into the body are really weak. So you're going to have some rot there. You're going to have some rot on this inner seal. Your outer skin obviously is going to be shot because if it's already jacking point is crushed or moved, then the outer skin is obviously not much good. So to start off with, obviously we've cut off our outer skin. Ideally, you don't want to go as high as I have. If you can stay beneath this swage line, cut it to say here, then you don't need to actually paint the quarter or do any repairs. But my rot had spread so far up, I had to. So we've lost this swage line, unfortunately. But that's kind of why, well, we've got to go this far on mine. Hopefully yours isn't that bad. If it is, then you're going to be in a similar boat to me. So I'm going to break this down into multiple stages. So first piece is get the outer skin off, which we've done, obviously. The second piece would be to check the condition of this horizontal bar, which is where the Widowmaker would go through. Now, most of the time, in my experience, these seem to be solid and in place. This one hasn't moved at all. You can see that none of the welds are broken or anything like that. So that's good. So the next thing to do would be grab our cutting disc, sorry. I'm going to leave this part here just as a reference for the repair panel, but what you would do really is stick your slitting disc in at multiple angles here and just try and release this front piece, because this will go in the bin essentially. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it there up just so we've got a reference for this swage line until we get the panel made. But yeah, this is seam welded around here, so you want to, with a slitting disc, cut, and eventually you'll get it free and that will come off. Once that's off, you're then going to want to bang a slitting disc just through this outer piece. Obviously we don't want to disturb that tube, so we want to go just beneath where the tube is, kind of on the top of my finger there, through the front and through the back. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove all of this rusty, crusty metal that's not particularly strong. And then once that's out of the way, we can then look at repairing this inner seal. There's two sections to look at. So this is a lovely bit thick 2mm steel. So if it's not too heavily pitted or corroded, you could just flap disc it down. This one, the return lip, sorry it's dark, but you can kind of see how wiggly this line is. This bottom return lip is absolutely shot. So at the very least it would need the sort of return repairing. That will get the flat disc on this inside edge and just see how bad this is. Probably a lot of this is going to need cutting out and replacing, but it's a dead easy repair. Just make sure you're prepared with some 2mm mild steel because it's quite thick. And then last but not least, you've got this sort of reinforcing piece here, which ties the seatbelt anchor point into the jacking point by the looks of it. The bulk of which it's connected up the top, up there, and it's also connected down here. So obviously we're going to cut away this piece, so it's not going to be tied to it here. But what we can do is, when we remake or repair this piece, we'll make sure we make it a little bit longer. And once I show you how we're going to repair it, we can then tie that into there. So I believe from factory, these aren't actually, it's not connected to the floor, it's not connected to the outer skin. I think it's just literally a return because it looks like it's floating. There's no sign that that was ever welded to there because there's some straight edges. I mean, some of it's rotten obviously, but yeah, I don't even think it was spot welded to the floor, like the outer skin. This is the first time I've gone this far on a coupe, so I can't really remember. I've never seen it before, but I don't think. I think it's just literally a folded piece, basically to bond the inner seal to the jacking point, etc. So when we repair this looks like 1mm, so not too thick. But all we really want to do is just basically cut a nice straight line there, and just put that fold back into it, and make sure we sort of create some sort of triangulation to tie into the new jacking point when we get there. But yeah, not too critical. And then last but not least, obviously most of you guys who've been watching this will know this coupe is very rusty. You can kind of see this entire inner sill is pretty minging. So all that's going to need, you know, grinding down, seeing if there's any good metal left. I think it's going to need some metal because this bit here is very pitted. But yeah, we need to get all that wire wood off. So we're going to break this down into multiple pieces. So cut your outer skin off. Get this piece, if you're not going that high, get this piece freed off, cut around there, disc through there. And then we want to figure out if we need to address this. Obviously we do. Hopefully you guys, most of you won't need to touch this. Clean up the inner sill and get this inner edge prepped. Started off just by putting the disc through diagonally just to get those front layers off. So that one come off, and then that one come off, and then all you're left with is that, which is not much metal work there. Again, just cut that off, get that front section out of the way. There's not much to that. As you can see, all of that's rotten, no good to use. And then on the back, similar story. Just stick a diagonal cut through there and through there, and then that's away from the jacking point then. So this is separate. We can clean this up. Well, it's pretty clean, but I have noticed there's a couple of spot welds where this is tied into here. Now if this is solid and there's no rot here, then technically you wouldn't need to cut that out, but this one, as you can see, there's rot between both those layers, so this needs to come off, and then we can obviously trim up this back piece as needed. So spot weld drill bit. Oh my god, that's crusty behind there. Spot weld drill bit. You've got two little spot welds. You should just be able to see them. And then we can get this piece out of the way and then have a better look at that. But yeah, that's how you get the jacking bar sort of ready for prep, because you can see everything above there is solid, and it's still tied into over 50% of the area above it and this section here. So this is nice and strong. So as long as we can brace that up, and to build a jacking point down from it, that'll be fine. Right, and that's the piece that connects the jacking point, or that was the jacking point that ties into this sill piece. So we've got this sort of crusty piece here. It looks like that will go straight up like a vertical piece. So there's a pretty nasty bend on this. So we're going to need to factor in that. But I think this naturally, once it's joined up to this jacking point, it then just curves down. So realistically, we need to, I think we'll just cut a dead straight line across this, get that out of the way, and then just make a mental note that we tie this into the jacking point somehow. The rust in there creeps up quite high, so yeah, I think let's mark that with a ruler, and then yeah, cut a nice straight line in that. So we've whipped that piece off. Obviously that lived there. A bit shitty on the back. I might go a bit higher on this. I mean, it is solid, but you can see when you turn that piece over, if that lived there, you can kind of see it's a little bit pitted there and there. So I might just go another centimetre up, just because I've got to replace this whole piece anyway. So if I go a centimetre up further, it's not a problem. And then I've just cut out that little piece that lived in there, that little bend on. Again, didn't look that bad on that side, but yeah, you can kind of see very thin there. So I'm thinking I might just come up to this line here, but we'll address that in a minute. So next up now, we're going to flat disc all of this inner sill and just see what we're left with. And then we can make a decision as to what needs to be replaced. And then that's kind of the worst of the ugly rock cut out, which is great. Right, we've marked out where we want to cut this inner sill. So obviously you want to take the bulk of the rot out. This metal's quite thick, and if you've got some pitting, you know, up sort of here, cutting that out is really unrealistic. You can just wire wheel that. You're never going to get every single bit of rot out there, but if you've got to think, you've got to really attack it where you know it's going to be a water trap, which is all your seams and stuff. So it's important you get rid of that real nasty stuff. Anything like this is 2mm thick steel. We can clean it up pretty easily. And any last little bits of pitting that's in the metal, yeah, it's not ideal, but in reality it's not. That's not a water trap there, any of that stuff. So just do your best, clean it up, treat it, and reseal it, and that should be good for a fair few years. But it's this nasty stuff we really got to eliminate. So I mean, in an ideal world, if it was a absolutely perfect resto, you'd probably chop all of this pitted stuff out as well, because you know it would have thinned a little bit. You've got to make a judgment. Is it worthwhile to start chopping up tons of metal, you know, on an area that, yeah, it might rot again in another 5-10 years, but it's not really going to rot like this. You know, you just might get a bit of surface rust or so. So in my opinion, you know, there's no point chasing this, because you could just go on and on and on. You've got to address this structural stuff. Anything that's going to be a water trap, water area where there's 2 seams of metal. This is nowhere near a seam. It's only going to be a bit of surface rust that might reappear after a few years. Really not worth worrying about. So we're going to basically chop out to this seam. We'll dig out that seam sealer, and then yeah, then we can remake that piece. And then the floor piece, there's a couple of holes to fill where I have gone through too far with the spot weld drill bit, but that's not too bad. I need to wire wheel all of this crap. Obviously wire wheel this again and flat this down at some point. The inner sill looks relatively solid beyond this point. I think this is back to 1mm, but there is a couple of little bits where it's just a bit thin and pitted. There's a little bit there, a couple of bits here. Sorry about the lighting. Let's see if I can make that any better. There you go. Yeah, there's a couple of bits that are quite pitted there and there. So I would imagine to get that pitting out, we'd have to grind away a lot of the metal. So I might just knock out that piece and that piece cut out and put a bit of fresh metal in there. I'm not sure yet. But yeah, next task, let's get this piece cut out, and then we're going to get that replicated. And that's our inner sill cut off. So yeah, anything you cut off, sometimes you want to make your template, you know, from the car as it is, so you've got a good reference. But if you take something off the car, just factor in, obviously you don't want to, if you're going to use this to create your new template, which we're going to, then we don't want to distort this metal, we don't want to bend it too much as we're pulling it off. So you know, you've got to be mindful. If you're going to be able to replicate it nicely, you want to try and get it off in one piece. You don't want to be hacking at it. Nice clean cuts, and obviously just factor in the piece you're going to make. You've got to allow for the thickness of the cutting disc. You know, the disc is probably only what's that, 1, maybe 2mm thick, probably 1mm thick, but you're going to get a cut that's about 2mm. So yeah, just factor in when you then remake this, you want to add a little bit on to allow for the slitting disc. So yeah, now we're going to make that. We've got some 2mm kicking around the workshop somewhere, so we will replicate that. I suspect to replicate that, we will probably make one. We'll treat this as one piece. So we'll create that first. There's a bit of a curve. This part sort of bulges out, so we might have to put some slits in it, bend it out, and then yeah, once we've made this piece, we'll then cut a second piece like an S shape, and then we'll weld that to it, because I don't think we will be able to make that any other way. I guess what we could do is, if we factor that piece in, we could create the flat edge and then slit it further and fold it. I don't know, it gets real complex, so yeah, we'll have to see. But yeah, we'll get that made up, we'll trace it out onto some 2mm, and I'll show you how I made that. Right, so how I'm going to replicate this, I've not quite got enough steel to get all this out of one piece, so I'm basically going to treat that as a separate piece because it's got a return here, a return here. So we're going to treat that as a separate piece to that. So what I've done is measured the length of this, obviously not edge to edge, I've followed the tape because there's a curve in there, which is whatever that dimension is. And then once you've cut that out, obviously we'll bend it to that shape, and then we'll have to fold this lip. So I've allowed for that lip as well. So yeah, we should be able to make this out of one piece, I'm hoping, all being well. And then just to finish up this piece, again pretty simple, it's essentially a square with a couple of folded edges. So mark that out, obviously that will fold up lovely. So yeah, let's get that cut. So we've got our piece. Bring you back in here. So I've added, you can kind of see the bend in it, and also this little lip. It's quite crude at the moment, but it's 2mm steel, so it's quite hard to bend. I have been using the butane torch just to make it a little bit easier to manipulate, but if we use that piece there as a reference point, you can kind of see, because obviously we don't want this to be out like this or like this, it needs to be parallel to this little edge here. So we're using that as our reference point. So what I'm thinking now, obviously we've got that bend because this kicks out, so we've got to factor that into our piece. So if you look, we can probably now tease that into place. So what I'm thinking is we need to trim some of this material off this top edge so it can pull up, because obviously where we've got this bend in it. I might tack it in place on the car because it's going to be much easier to get that line correct, and then I can measure down and mark out how far I need to add this lip, because obviously we've got this excess material on the top. So yeah, I think I'm going to tack that in place, get it following this line so I know it's correct, and then yeah, then we can get the return added to it. Right, that's our inner seal now tacked in place. So just to mention, there is this pretty gnarly curve here, and if you see me try and get this into this piece, it's tricky because you're going to fold it this way and have to try and bend the metal that way. So it's going to become, it's a complex curve, so you're folding it in two directions. So it's not the easiest. Luckily this one, obviously the rod hadn't gone too far up, so it was kind of in the middle of the fold. But if you then had to bring it back down again, that'd be pretty tricky. Anyway, that's now tacked in, lovely, so that's ready to be seam welded in a moment. But before I do that, I want to get this fold in for the lip on the return. So if you remember, the return has that little lip on it. So to replicate that, what I've done basically is, we know where the floor curves on this side, so that's our starting point, and then on this back side, I kept this piece and I've just measured down and marked where the curve is. So this is kind of the beginning of the curve. So there's two things we've got to do here. One, I'm just going to run my flat disc, my slitting disc, just very slightly through the top layer of this metal, just so it has a clear point in which it wants to fold, because that's quite a tricky bit of metal to, because it's thick, you know, it's not the easiest thing to fold. So I'm just going to take off, you know, 0.2 or 0.3 of a mil, just to get that return folded nice and you know, as a 90-degree rather than like a giant radius turn. And also because it's a complex curve, it goes we'll need to slit, we'll probably have to put a slit here and a slit here, so that piece will fold under, that piece will fold that way, that piece will fold that way, and then obviously we'll then trim, we'll be left with some V's, one will overlap, one will be short. We'll then cut that, weld, and then we should have a nice seamless return. So the other option, if you weren't feeling that brave, what you could do is just get your piece of metal in here and then make the return out of a flat piece, like you'd have to draw out like an S shape on your metal, and then you'd have to seam weld along that. I'm trying to minimise the amount of welding because it's just, you know, it takes time, So whatever you can do in one piece of metal obviously is preferable. You know, less chance of rot, stuff like that, especially on, you know, an area like this. So, but yeah, we'll get the flap disc in action, or the slitting disc, sorry, and get this marked out, folded, and then once we're happy with that, we can then seam weld this and then attack this last little corner. And then that comes together just lovely. So we've got this all now folded round. So it looks a bit crude at the moment, but we've made that return lovely. So like these ones that have opened up, we're going to weld there, we're going to weld there, we're going to weld there, and then this one, as it's an internal corner or turn, whatever you want to call it, we're going to re-slit that with a cutting disc there, that one's probably alright, and then we'll weld them up, and then that's our lip done, and we can get on with seam welding this in a lip. But yeah, that's a nice, quick, easy way. I didn't film it, unfortunately. I forgot to put the camera on. But yeah, you put a little slit here just to give the metal a sort of a weaker point to then fold on. You can see I haven't taken a lot of metal off there. If that focuses. Well, that's our corner piece made. So yeah, looking pretty good. So that sits in there like so. Obviously we need to manipulate some of those edges slightly, but yeah, you get the gist. And that's how I finished that corner, so it can still drain. And like I said, we just need to knock a bit off this back return. Don't know if you can see that. There we go. Need to knock a bit off that back return once it's welded in place, because it's too long. We can go ahead and get that welded in. Right, so that is now welded in, lovely and solid. We have trimmed our return. I haven't welded this because I may cut this whole inner arch strip out, but we're not there yet. But yeah, that's finished. Seam welded all the way along, so that's lovely. And then the underside, I did the slit in as you saw, and then I've just welded these up where needed. So that's all done. The back side needs cleaning up, but I'm not worried about that. But yeah, pretty happy with that. The only welds really you need to grind down are these little ones right near this edge and on this back seam, because obviously the outer seal is going to clamp close to that, along with these here. This needs to be a nice flat edge, so you can leave all of these, don't need to knock them down. I mean, I'll just take the head off them because it takes 2 seconds. But yeah, that is all fine to leave all of that in there. You're never going to see it, it doesn't get in the way of anything, so that's good. So we can get some weld through primer set on that now, so that bit's knocked off. Right, so your next step, once we've done this inner seal, we now need to recreate this jacking point. So assuming all of this is solid on yours, which generally they are, we're going to basically weld to this tube and to the inner seal. Basically there's 2 pieces to replicate this jacking point. Well, it's not going to be like OEM, it should be stronger and much simpler, you know, to replicate at home. So we've got some thick 6mm plate, and we've got some steel tubing. I think it's 2mm wall diameter, so nice and thick. And then the plan is much the same as what we did on the front one, which is to basically cut a flat plate for the base, cut the tube, weld the tube to the plate, weld the tube to here, weld the plate to here, and I'll probably add a bit of extra bracing just from here down, just to tie that in. But yeah, quite straightforward. So first things first, I've done this a few times now, so I've got the dimensions saved. So I've got a little drawing because I've made a few of these now. So this is the dimensions which I use for the base plate. So we are 110mm wide, or that dimension, by 100mm. Now this plate you can buy off eBay, or that's where I bought this, and this is already 100mm wide. So essentially there's 2 edges you don't have to cut, which makes life much easier because it's thick, so each for a cutting disc, etc, etc. But yeah, so we just need to cut down 110mm from this edge. So we can just mark that up pretty easily. 110 mil. So yeah, we're going to cut that off next. One thing to mention is this size isn't, you know, it doesn't have to be exactly 100 mil by 110 mil. That's just the size that I've opted with because it makes sense, because they haven't got to do tons of trimming on this piece of metal. I can basically just make one cut and then we've got a base plate. We will need to obviously trim out where the jacking pad lives. That is a job for what I've used so far. If you've got a pillar drill, that'll make life pretty easy. But I've basically been using spot weld drills because they're really sharp. Cut through that metal and then just use a Dremel. I've got a pretty expensive one, but you know, if you've got one at home, it might take you a while. Essentially just Dremel out that hole, and if you've got a jacking pad to hand, I've got one somewhere, you can just basically trace the shape that's on that. Start off smaller, make sure the pad goes in there, and then obviously open the hole up as you need to make the pad, you know, fit but not be loose and wobbling around. And also another thing to mention is you've got to be aware that this, whilst this is sort of dead vertical, or it should be if it's OEM, this jacking point is not vertical, so not horizontal, so this would be horizontal, and you can kind of see it's got a slight kick up to it. So just factor that in when you're cutting the tube, or making the tube fit this pole. And also just bear in mind that the sill wants to wrap around and kicks in quite aggressively, so you can't, if you're making this base plate, you can't go, oh, I'll just make it out to, you know, to this edge here and go, oh, it's 120 mil, which you would think it would be. But if you come out too far, then the actual outer sill skin won't be able to sit into its place because that jacking pad is going to touch it. So 110 mil seem to be ideal on the width. So it's going to be 110 mil this way, and then 100 mil, so it's going to finish up there. And then that way, it might look like it's a little bit short, you know, bearing relative to this, but it clears the outer skin quite nicely. If you really wanted, you might be able to make it a bit bigger, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. You know, as long as it's structurally in there sound and you can get everything back together nice and solidly, then that's all you need. So we'll get that marked up, trim out using this guide that I've kept. I'm actually thinking of maybe getting some of these pre-cut because I do quite a few repairs using these now. So if you think you might be interested in some of them, drop me a comment. I might get some made up and then I can maybe put them on the website. They're not going to be expensive, probably 20 quid per jacking plate, and then the tube, you can just buy that generically. But obviously not all of you got the tools to be dremeling that out, and it is a bit time consuming. So yeah, let me know. I'm thinking to do it anyway because it will save me a bit of time when I'm doing repairs. But if it's something you think you'd be interested in, just drop me a message and I will add them to the website. Right, our jacking point parts are made and ready to be welded on the car. So you've got this base plate which I showed you earlier. I've then, to get this piece cut out for the pad to sit in it, which the pad is there. That sits in there quite nicely. Obviously these tabs can be bent out to make sure it doesn't drop out, but yeah, it's quite a nice snug fit. So that's good. Anyway, let's pop that out. So you can see my hole isn't like perfect. Obviously I'm making it by hand, but it's pretty good. So the way I did that was marked out the hole, centre punch, so one of them, and then use a spot weld drill bit on a slow speed setting, on like slow. You don't want it mega fast because it will just blunt the bit. But yeah, slowly drill that through. A couple of minutes you'll get through there, you'll get like a pilot hole. And then once you've done your pilot hole, I'll use one of these. It's like a fancy Dremel DeWalt jobby with these diamond tipped rotary bits. Basically just smash that in there, and then it'll cut through that like it's a bit of butter. So that's a base plate done. That takes the jacking pad, and then the next thing is we need this vertical piece which hooks the base plate onto the tube on the chassis. So that lives like that. All I do is just mark a centre line and then basically put a V with a grinder, front and back, and then just clean it up with a flat disc so it fits nicely around the tube on the car. You probably could do a better job. I'm guessing you'd probably clamp that and use some sort of hole saw. I don't have one, but this works for me, so that's what I've gone with. And then the bottom end, you can see I've just added a bit of an angle on it, because although the jacking plate is horizontal, the tube on the car isn't, so we have to just allow for that to make sure we can keep this plate nice and horizontal. So that's basically what we end up with, and now we can go and weld it on the car. There we go, and that's our jacking point now welded in, looking pretty good. So welded to this tube and then welded to the inner seal. So just to tie that off, we've got to add we said at the start of the video we've got to bring this down just to replicate how it was OEM, and then that needs to be tied into this. So we'll add a bit of triangulation in there. I'm not sure how much that does for strength on the jacking point. I think it's more for the seatbelt anchor point. So we need to add a little bit of bracing down there, and then just for reinforcement we're going to add some sort of brace just to tie the front edge of this down to the front edge of that, just to help spread the load on this, because it's a piece of cake. Why wouldn't you? I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but yeah, just for peace of mind. We'll add a small square plate there. Once our jacking plate is in there, lovely, I've added some weld through primer, just because some of these areas are going to get boxed off in a second. So we've got a couple of plates to make initially. The first one is this piece here, which just needs to tie into the base plate. That's your seatbelt anchor point. So started off with a bit of cardboard, make a rough template using that. So this first one, we're going to do it out of two pieces, because this piece here is a long fillet that's just got a fold on it. So I figured what we'll do is we'll do this complex piece here, which has got a few folds in it. You can kind of see. So I've just knocked that up, cut that out, and then we're left with this little guy. So that needs bending into shape. But what I'll probably do with that is actually tack it in place and then weld it and shape it as I go, because it's a complex shape, so it's easier just to do that, I think. So there's our first little repair piece, and then our second one is we just want to add some bracing to this box section. Obviously we've got the tube and the base plate, but what I did on the front is just add some sort of load bearing to this front edge. So for this, what I did was I got some 2mm flat plate. Again, started off with a crude template, fitted that in there like so, and then yeah, cut that out of some 2mm, folded the edges, and then just snip these corners off so I can actually get it in there. But then that sits in there quite nicely, somehow, if I remember rightly. There we go, and then we'll just add a bit more strength into it. You probably don't have to do this, but I've got the material, and I'd rather it just be super strong for future proof. So yeah, now we can buzz a few tacks on that just to add a bit more strength into that. That'll be fine. Really, it's just to stop there being any sort of pivoting on this plate, because we want to keep this plate nice and flat. If you're jacking on it, you don't want it moving, because it could, you know, start to put stress in an area you don't want. So I'm just going overkill for peace of mind. So yeah, a bit of weld through primer on the back of that. We'll run a few bits of weld on it where we can. Then that's happy. This one will get tacked in, and then realistically that's your jacking point sort of done. This is a separate piece, and this outer skin is sort of a separate piece, so there's loads of videos showing how you're doing the outer skin. But yeah, let's get these inner bits on. That's our reinforcement added, so this is lovely and welded to that. We've done this little piece in here, just chuck some light on it for you, there we go. So that piece is in, and then just to finish up, I've then made, because this piece here was rotten if you remember, so there's a small little repair panel to go on that, which is just here, which is this one here. So that's going to go onto there and get welded. So this piece, I've done some research, this piece would never have actually joined into the inner sill. You can see there's a gap, about 10-15mm gap all along, front and back. So that piece is then ready to weld on, and then in theory that's your jacking point repair done. Before I put that on, I'm going to make some small repairs to this inner floor, because there's a few bits that are heavily pitted, and yeah, need a bit of attention, especially on the underside. So yeah, most of you shouldn't need to touch too much here, I wouldn't expect, but yeah, if you've got anything nasty, see there's some deep pitting in places, then obviously get that addressed. But yeah, once that's done, this is now strong. I mean, you may get away with not even welding this. I mean, it seems a bit overkill to put this in this piece in, but I want to put it back to OEM or as close to where possible, so let's put it in there. The bulk of the metal is still up there, of course, but let's just weld it back in. It's no big deal. So yeah, once you've got all of this rebuilt up, it's just your outer skin to put back on. Obviously seam weld this top piece here, add some weld around here, and then some spot welds on the underside to replicate the original setup. I don't think many of you will be going in quite as far as I've been, but it's probably been the perfect car to show you just how bad it can be and how far you've got to go sometimes. So yeah, hopefully this has been useful. Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to crack on now off camera, and yeah, next video will be hopefully putting the rear end and stuff back in. If you've watched this far, thank you for watching. But just to give you a little sneak peek, the underside is all stripped back. We've primed anywhere that went back to bare metal, so that's all sorted and ready for some underbody coating and then brake lines and stuff. We've still obviously got this crap to deal with, but yeah, lots of progress. So hopefully in the next few weeks this should come together quite nicely. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.